over 40% of consumer price index is housing, and it was essentially flat month over month. And that's why the overall numbers were essentially flat month over month.
Banning our money supply because the Fed has been restricted. I'm going to explain that.
Credit card loans, car loans, those are short-term borrowing rates, and they are low right now.
Microsoft and Google came out and said, we're not going to reduce our billions of dollars of spending. Existing home sales, 4 million home sales annual rate. That's with a little drop.
Hey, it's KP coming to you live from Park City. It's CPI Inflation Day, and what better place to be than Burger King, where beef prices are up, and you got Starbucks, where coffee's up, but egg prices are down. So what's interesting is, over 40% of consumer price index is housing, and it was essentially flat month over month. And that's why the overall numbers were essentially flat month over month, 2.7% and 2.6% between headline and core. This is how you engineer a soft landing, just a nice, slow, gradual decline. Sometimes there's a month where things spike up like food within the month, and housing was flat. I read a lot of different newsletters. I'm not a big TV watcher. Axios, which leans hard left, their take on this literally said nothing about housing at all, which is the biggest component. All it said was food inflation was really high. So I just regurgitated the stats on coffee, beef, and eggs for you. The way you kind of decipher through extreme right and extreme left media, at least newsletters, at the very end of the article is the actual facts that they can't possibly spin it in their direction. So they do have really good reporting, and that's why I like the data. But obviously, no matter right or left slanted mainstream media, you just can't change people who feel, so diehard about things. And on that note, there's a lot going on in the world, and there's a lot going on with this administration as it relates to housing. We've talked about potentially $200 billion in mortgage-backed securities being purchased at the direction of FHFA by Fannie and Freddie. More liquidity, lowering interest rates. I just don't see anything wrong with that whatsoever. I know there's so many articles saying, well, here's what it would actually do, this and that. Guys, more liquidity to buy and sell money, even if it's short term, is going to give a nice little boost. And who knows if it actually gets implemented? I have no idea. It's an election year. We had a great call with the Mortgage Bankers Association yesterday, talking about housing policy, the Independent Mortgage Banker Network call, monthly call. Mickey Schilling and I co-chair that together with, Tamara and the entire crew, Justin Wiseman, Anthony Siller, so many people, just a great group, Liz Facemeyer, everybody. And they were talking about how the state regulation is starting to step in. And so we'll keep an eye on that. But at the federal level, there hasn't been any policy to sink our teeth into. So whether it's 50-year mortgage, $200 billion of MBS, who's getting fired, who's getting hired, LOPAs, FHA at the direction of HUD, lowering their MIP to spend $189 billion sitting on the sidelines. But none of that has happened yet. But as we get closer to a midterm election, you can bet that more stuff will happen. I know that each party's trying to rally their base, whether it be through, whatever gets them excited, hatred for Trump or hatred for bigger government that spends money, our tax dollars, by the way, which is across all party lines, wastefully. I think this country is socially moderate and fiscally conservative. It's just when you get to some of the heart-tugging issues is when you start to really rally your base. So I try and exercise some emotional intelligence and not let my emotions and passion get the best of me, but I can't help it. I'm only human. I'm working on it with you all every day. The job data is weak. And someone asked me, about inflation and GDP. My fraternity brother, Brian Beatty, good dude. We shared a bathroom together in the fraternity house. He may or may not have broke up a couple fights that I got into. Thank you, Brian. But he works at Nexa, good dude. And he asked a question about inflation and GDP. And, there's a difference between good inflation and bad inflation. And so, bad inflation are things that are, self-imposed, right? We just placed a 25% tariff on anything doing business with Iran. Thank you for attention to this matter. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that's going to give us another pop in inflation and be bad for our pocketbooks heading into elections, which everyone votes their pocketbook. I don't know. But I know that generally tariffs have a one-time effect and they start to pass through when everyone was freaking out back in April. And now it's a big, humongous, absolute nothing burger as inflation continues to cool, like our heads. But the good inflation is, if wage inflation is growing at a pace, okay, our wages are growing at a pace that outpace inflation of just things that we buy. And the Fed likes to look at the core PCE, personal consumption expenditure, which we typically get at the end of the month. Then that's okay. If the economy is growing, jobs are growing, wages are growing, inflation can grow. Like the 40-year run of core PCE is 2.4%. We're right there. So we're never at 2%. Literally, it's always like around 2.4. And that stops right before the end of the 70s and early 80s, that number, because it was hyperinflation, obviously, for oil. By the way, oil and gas is the cheapest it's been. Gas at the pump, cheapest it's been in freaking forever. Obviously, the Mommy Mobile has gas and so does our rental car, but that's really good for people's pocketbooks.
Hey, it's KP coming to you live from Corona, California. Back at the desk after a little over a week, and it's busy. Got a lot to talk about, so I'll try and crank through it. It is 10 o'clock on the West Coast. Trying to get everything done before I get out of here, and all the travel starts to kick off. Serious FOMO that I not make the MISMO Summit, but I was there virtually for our board meeting. And I will be at Cotality's event next week. And then we've got the IMB right back in Amelia Island, Florida. It never ends. And then, of course, not too long after that, we'll have the Housing Wire Economic Summit. So it's time to hit the road. Let's go. It's ready. We're off to the races. Rates at 3-year lows. That's a big deal. Has housing turned the corner? That was a headline I read when the existing home sales was up the third month in a row. And what's interesting is, we're talking about, October, November, December, which are not the seasonal purchase times of the year. So we're starting the year at 3-year low rates. Our locks are showing it. We're seeing it. Activity is up, and it will continue to pick up. So we'll see. I don't know if we've turned the corner. How about inflation? CPI, it's been cooling. We know that 44% of the CPI is housing, and it's showing some slowing, right? But that's an index which has 12 monthly readings, so there's some old data in there that isn't showing what the real data is. But the Fed looks at the PCE, the core PCE, the personal consumption expenditure, and so I believe that comes out next Thursday. And I subscribe to Tom Lee from Fundstrat. They have this data they put out. They put out a macro minute a few times a week. And his macro minute today was very interesting. It said that some estimates for core PCE was 0.17. Now, there are PPI. We just had PPI this week, Producer Price Index. Some of those inputs flow their way into the PCE. We had some upward revision, 1 month, and then 1 month was down and flat. And so, there's all this data that's being distorted, which I'll get into in just a second. And I'll also get into the Fed talking about that lawsuit. Well, it's not a lawsuit. I've seen criminal investigation, but I'll tell you what it really is. It's just a subpoena, but whatever. So, if the PCE is at 0.17% annualized, that's under 2%. And, that would, for the moment, squash any fears of inflation or reigniting inflation. But of course, we could have the tariff ruling any moment now that would have to return, what's $150 billion raised so far, by the numbers over a 10-year projected period. The CBO says, that's $3 trillion in revenue that would have come our way, and then without the tariffs, it's $900 billion. It's like over $2.1 trillion in revenue to not pay down our debt and deficit that would just evaporate. Now, of course, you guys know I love the Crispin blog. It's like the most amazing thing. On Fridays we have The Last Word. Robbie Crispin produces a show with Brian, Christy, and Courtney, and myself. And I was just trying to catch up on email after being out. And there was a link in there saying what the backup plan was for the administration in case the tariff ruling did not go their way. I've kind of gathered through some things that it was, executive order, or they'll use some other statute, or whatever the case may be. So I clicked on the link in the Chrisman blog, I think it was from Saturday, and it took me to a Fox News clip. And I was like, no mainstream media. Like, that's just not my thing. So I watched about 3 minutes of it, and then Kevin Hassett started spitting all the facts and start getting political, and I just like, all right, I gotta get away from the spin from both sides. I don't like politics. I just don't like. I heard a clip this morning on CNBC with Elizabeth Warren, and bankruptcy filings are up 40%. And then here I get this great article from Jim O'Reilly, the nationalbankruptcy.com, and I was reading the actual data, and Chapter 7's up 20-ish%, Chapter 11's are up 20-ish%. But the bankruptcy data that was on here, it said, we're still 28% lower than the pre-pandemic total recorded in the calendar year 2019. So, people love to twist facts and data, and I think it's really good at just looking at it yourself and trying not to listen to a spin. Of course, if you're listening to any politician, it's almost always a spin, right? If you have a really low number and it goes up, the percentage could be huge, but the number in its totality is still really not that big of a deal. So I'm not saying it's not a big deal that foreclosures are on the rise, but still lower than 2019. So that's got to be good, right? What else is in the news to set the table for me to get into the Jay Powell investigation? I think it's worth mentioning that, we extracted a leader from Venezuela, and I haven't heard any other fallout from that. The bond market was pretty calm. Oil prices didn't really go up. And then we talked about buying Greenland. And then now we have 3 destroyers and an aircraft carrier making its way over towards Iran. And so that actually did rattle oil prices for a little bit, but then it kind of capped out. So, trying to exercise emotional intelligence, I'll just say I'll watch the bond market and see what people that trade trillions of dollars all the time on the greatest fixed income security of the planet to back up King Dollar. What do they really think? Are they worried? Because if they're not worried, I should be unbothered too. Not that I worry about something. So it is kind of crazy with some of the geopolitical events. And I'm not trying to not be empathetic. I mean, some of these videos, I went doom scrolling for just a little bit. I mean, just people just protesting, like something you have a right to do, just being shot just because they're protesting, not because, they ran someone over or, threw rocks or whatever. I don't know. It's pretty crazy. So I don't know what's going on. It's a little nuts out there. I hope it calms down. Hate seeing anybody die. So, but I'll zoom back out and talk about Jay Powell. I think, we're in an election year. So you get all these trial balloons that go out, and by the way, why does all this matter? Because rates matter, affordability matters, the flow of money matters. We're picking up steam earlier this year than last year, and that's good for our business. And this gives us talking points, for our consumers to say where we think rates are going. And so, it does matter. So Jay Powell, testified in June before Congress and, talking about the building expense, $2.5 billion. And then there was, an overrun there. I mean, I hate, I'm just learning about all this myself. So, when you have $2.5 billion or $3 billion in a building project with a $6 trillion balance sheet, it's hard to like think like that's a big deal. But then of course, I learn about other fraud around the country for, twice that or more. So anyway, Jay Powell testified before Congress, and look, there are people in the House and Senate that don't want any taxpayer dollars wasted. And that's not lost on me. I hate wasting money. I like a dollar, So, there was a House representative that referred the case to the Department of Justice, and it just now came out as a subpoena for obviously for information. That's different than an indictment. So, I personally, my gut tells me is that this is political midterm election year kind of saber rattling, but who knows? I mean, maybe they do go to court. I mean, I don't know if anyone got taken to court and held to task more than President Trump. And so maybe he's just pissed off and getting back at him. Although I think Jay Powell has done a great job. I think he's engineered, him and his team and the Fed and everybody, they've engineered a soft landing. I mean, clearly they have been cutting rates. And the last year and the year before, the rates were being cut between September and December, and then they would pause the first part of the year, January up to that September meeting. That doesn't mean that that's going to happen a third year in a row. But with all this distortion in data, with the government shutdown, there's a lot of like, well, is it real? These month-over-month comparisons don't quite make sense, so I'm not really sure what to make of it. Is inflation really cooling? What's going on with labor? So I think a lot of members of the Fed are sitting back and waiting for the information to continue to flow through. And so I got news for everybody. We're in a no hire, no fire labor market. It's soft, and it's just hard to find a job. But productivity is good, and wage inflation is good if you are working. The K-shaped economy, top 10% of the of income earners and wealth in America is spending like 50%. Retail sales was up. Again, inflation is cooling. So it's just kind of steady as she goes. And that's good, right? If we don't have volatility in the markets, then, that's good for rates. That's good for our cap markets teams. They don't like volatility. You can't win when you have rates going up and going down. And so since September, we've been between 4 and 4.20 on the 10-year Treasury yield. And lately, let's call it the last 45 days, it's been the upper range between 410 and 420. Has not pierced through that and hasn't pierced down. That's pretty steady. So it's good for our cap markets team. Mortgage spreads last year improved 100 basis points from the beginning of the year. I got that data from Ivy Zelman, and Associates, a Walker Dunlop company. So, the spread between the 30-year fixed rate and the 10-year Treasury has improved 100 basis points. That's great for rates. So there's a lot of good stuff going for us into the year as we continue to get busy. And if we have a mild winter, spring purchase season will pick up around the country a little bit more as well. And that is a big deal. If you have these nor'easters and you have these really horrible storms in the Northeast where it's cold, people, they still actually go out and look at houses. And so that kind of gets delayed. And but if you have a mild winter, it could kick off. So that's it. That's all I want to talk about. I could go on and on, but things are in a good spot. And, we'll just, I will say it's Q1 earnings season. So the stock market started with the financials this week. And, banks, generally are making money. They're still loan loss reserving in case there are some foreclosures or some credit losses later. Some of the banks didn't do so well this week because of the proposed 10%, credit card interest rate cap. Although I think that's just another election year, trial balloon. Like, what do people think about it? What do people think about investors being banned from buying? What do people think about us buying $200 billion in mortgage-backed securities? We need to see some policy and some things that can be enacted for us to sink our teeth into. And so, we're reacting to all these announcements just to see what people think. And I think there'll be a lot more of that to come in an election year. And I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to get too political because people get in their feelings. Have a wonderful weekend. Have a wonderful MLK Day weekend. We are celebrating the man who promoted peace. And I think our nation generally don't believe what you see on the TV. Generally, we all get along pretty good. And so let's go have some dreams this weekend and keep dreaming of positive nation, positive stuff. Have a good one. Cheers.
You've been listening to KP Talks Dollars and Cents, a top-rated show for those who want to learn about the economy and mortgage environment. Tune in each week for more episodes, and please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Kevin Perenio does not render or offer to render personalized investment or tax advice through KP Talks Dollars and Cents. The information provided is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial, tax, investment, or legal advice. For more info, follow KP Talks Dollars and Cents on all of our social channels.